Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm your PhD of politics, Dr. Stephen Coleman, and welcome to Coleman and Company's 31st Political Pundit Night, exclusively on mytwintears.com. Folks, American politics American politics gone insane? That's the topic of discussion tonight. When you think of it, the January 6th situation, Congressman Santos, the Long Island congressman, the border crisis, both the southern border and more our border with Canada, we have that situation, police violence on the streets of Memphis as well as other cities, and what looks like President Trump could very well be indicted by a grand jury that's been meeting in Manhattan. So all of that and so much more leads to the question, American politics, has it gone insane? We have a great panel this evening. Let me just mention who's on the panel. Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, and educator. He's coming live and direct from outside of Houston, Texas. That's great. We have this Zoom. You can go all over the country and the world. Susan Betts-Totoma is with us. She's an attorney and a pastor. Rodney Strange, Chemung County legislator, 15th District, Republican Rodney Strange. Deborah Lynch, political activist and environmentalist. Steve Sprague is here. He's a former congressional staffer, former Star Gazette reporter, and former local television journalist. Since his television journalism was on a competing outlet, I won't mention the outlet, but has those credentials. It's great that Steve is here. Georgia Verdier, the Elmira Corning NAACP president, is with us. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, associate professor at Elmira College and political analyst. Great to have Dr. Professor Kolosinski with us. Tom Santulli, former Chemung County executive, is here tonight. The Reverend Nathaniel Wright, pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Ithaca, and also he's the former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. And Jeff Murray, veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network. I consider Jeff Murray to be the Dean of Journalism in the Twin Tiers. I want to start off this evening by asking each person to spend 2 minutes or less to address the question, has American politics gone insane? So let's start off with Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, educator. Dr. Dozier, has politics gone insane in America?
Well, thank you for having me on, Dr. Coleman. Well, when we look at American politics and when we look at it historically, and I can only go back but so many years for myself, but when we look at the McCarthy era, in the 1940s and the 50s, while then, communism, and so there was craziness then. Then we could pick up with Strom Thurmond and those who were the segregationists who were in American politics, and we still see that exploding around the country. Not segregation, but racism. And so we have some wild things going on today. I mean, where but in American politics can you have a U.S. congressman call the president of the U.S. during the address a liar? And so we have some crazy things going on. We have crazy people in Congress. How can we, the people of American citizens, trust our congresspersons when they can see a insurrection right before them and say, oh no, they're only visitors to the Capitol? So how can we trust these Congress people today? I think one of the things, it's always been there, but in today's time, we now have the news that is covering it. We can see it live on television. Not only is it broadcast in America, but around the world. Fortunately, they're not throwing shoes at one another like they do in other countries. but our politics it's just crazy. It's just outrageous.
Thank you, Dr. Dozier. Each person will talk for 2 minutes or less on the question on American politics. Has it gone insane? And then after that, we'll have a discussion. So keep in mind what other people are saying so we can have some debate and discussion very soon. Next up, for 2 minutes or less, so the 2-minute introduction, opening statement. She's an attorney, so Susan Betz-Tatoma, pastor and attorney. Susan, your opening statement.
Thank you, Steve, for having me on. I believe that American politics, as Dr. Dozier said, has always been a little crazy and insane. But the difference now is the cancel culture and the acceptability of it. Back when things were going rough, at least in my lifetime, whether it was in the 60s and the civil rights protests and, all of the justifiable unrest that we've had in this country, people did not stop talking to friends and family as a normal part of culture. I suppose there were always people who may have done that, but now it is almost expected that if you disagree with someone, if they voted for someone you didn't vote for, then maybe you shouldn't go to Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe you shouldn't be friends with them anymore. And it's important to keep the dialogue going, because if we don't keep the dialogue going, it's going to just get more and more crazy. And I fear for the future of our country if we don't settle down a little bit and start talking to each other again instead of engaging in cancel culture regarding politics.
Attorney Susan Betz-Tatoma, also a pastor in Corning, with her opening statement. Republicans and Democrats, kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys these days. Next up, for his 2-minute opening statement, Rodney Strange, Chemung County legislator, 50th District, a Republican. Rodney Strange.
I absolutely believe it's gone insane. And it's not just between the two political parties anymore. I mean, I was chairman of the county Republican Party for 8 years, and I had an awful lot of infighting within the Republican Party. People, for example, Tom Reed was our congressman. He was a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I had other county chairs who were angry with Tom Reed because he was a member of that committee, because they did not want him working with Democrats to get things done. I had local Republicans here in Chemung County attacking other Republicans. As chair, I always subscribe to Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment: do not say ill things of other Republicans. And it's not just, like I said, between Republicans and Democrats anymore. It's within the parties, and the Democrats have it too, between the progressives and the moderates. The debate anymore isn't "I'm right, you're wrong." It's "I'm right and you're stupid." There's no middle ground anymore. You can't disagree with someone and then be friends afterwards. I mean, we all remember Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan having vigorous debates and then going out for a beer after hours. We don't have that anymore, and it's unfortunate. When I run for office, I run as a Republican, but I also run on an independent line called 15th District United, because I want the people in my district to know, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, independents, liberals, to know that I represent all of them. And I get criticized by some people for doing that. So, yeah, I think that it's insane on both sides of the political aisle.
Thank you, Rodney Strange, county legislator, Chemung County legislator from the 15th District. And on this program, we're talking about politics going crazy. It's not only national politics, but what about state and local politics? I'm not in a position to have all the information, but it seems to me sometimes in Chemung County, it's County Executive Chris Moss against the world. There's all kinds of debate going back and forth in terms of county politics and what the county wants to do in terms of the legislature and what Chris Moss wants to do, and so on and so on. Maybe we'll get into that and a lot more later. Deborah Lynch is here. Deborah is a lifelong political activist and environmental activist. I appreciate Deborah being here. Deborah Lynch, opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for having me on your program. I enjoyed doing this. And I like listening to other people go first. I get good pointers from other people. And everything that has been said is on point, in my opinion. But one of the things I think that's driving our political discourse, unfortunately, and it is usually the root of all evil, is money. And when I say that, I'm talking about the Citizens United decision that happened in 2010. And the fact that we now have unlimited campaign contributions going to people from basically 100. If you drill it down, it's like 100 people that donate to super PACs and then basically donate to all the candidates. And I don't care what side of the aisle, they're going to take the money, because to run a successful campaign, especially at a congressional level, usually requires, even in upstate New York, between $2 and $5 million. Nobody can do that without going to these PACs. And unfortunately, to me, when that happens, you kind of are selling your soul a little bit. And it creates a lot of discourse, because you're kind of beholden to that person or people that have donated this money. And until that goes away and we get control of that campaign finance, you're going to have a lot of this political discourse, and average everyday people like the rest of us aren't going to be able to run in those type of campaigns because we don't have the money. So I think that that's one of the things we have to start with, in my opinion, to try to get control of this. And it's true on both sides. They all do it. And it's sad to me.
Yeah. Deborah Lynch, I know we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but some say that the Citizens United decision kind of ruined our democracy. Is that hyperbole, or is there a lot?
Oh, no. It's on point, in my opinion. I remember Charlie Young looking at me saying, it's too late. It's too late. And that was even before Citizens United, because he passed away. Well, he passed away shortly after that, but he was having some dementia and stuff, but he knew, he could see it. He could see how the large corporations that are owned by basically 100 people were controlling our elections. And in order to have fair and honest elections where where the discourse doesn't get so heated and so debated, you have to be able to allow everyday people like the rest of us to run, to bring in new ideas and new, so yes, I think our democracy is in peril.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks, or many folks, that have said for decades that elections in America have always been a symbolic exercise to legitimize the status quo. A political scientist named Murray Edelman has put forth that thesis over the years. Thanks, Deborah. I know we'll be hearing more from you as we move on.
Yes, and I want to thank the people on this call that are in and have been in the news, because, without people truth telling like you're doing tonight, nothing changes. So.
Steve Sprague is a former congressional staffer, a former Star Gazette reporter, and a former local television journalist, reporter, anchor, the whole schmeal. Steve, welcome to Political Pundit Night. What did I leave out in terms of your background?
Well, you left out the fact that I am a political Pollyanna. I'm still a strong believer in the values we started with. But I also want to echo my thanks to you, Dr. Coleman, for inviting me, and to all of our colleagues on this broadcast who contribute their time and energy to what is certainly a very valuable public exchange. Now, to the question. Is it insane? I don't know. That suggests mental illness. I see two other problems present. One would be a virus, and that's rabies. It seems to have taken over and created an awful lot of angry politicians, angry for not much reason. The second one would be a dissolution of a lot of our political standards into what is beginning to look frighteningly like a cult. The following of an individual, regardless of what that person does. And then when you add in the constant desire for maintaining office and trying to please the biggest crowd, that's a bad combination. I went to the House of Representatives to work for a Democrat in 1976. I worked for 2 Republicans in the House after that. And I think I'm happy to be away from Washington now.
Steve, for the folks that are watching right now, which congressman did you work for in the House of Representatives?
Well, I was working at the Star Gazette when Stan Lundeen was elected in March of 1976 in a special election. He asked me to go to Washington with him as his press secretary. After 2 terms, I went to work for a fellow named Gary Lee from the Dryden area, a Republican. And then my last 6 years on the Hill, I worked with an Oregon congressman. His name was Bob Smith. He was a cattle rancher. And then I left for another criminal career as a registered lobbyist with the National Association. But I did finish, I think, at least trying to restore things. I spent 20 years with, or 19 and a half years with the headquarters of Transportation Security Administration.
Well, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. I know we'll be hearing a lot more from you as the evening progresses. Next up, with her opening statement, is Georgia Verdier, the Elmira Corning NAACP president. Georgia Verdier.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Coleman, for this relevant question. Has American politics gone insane? And in my opening statement, my opinion is American politics are rather chaotic. However, some politicians have gone insane. And I want to walk you through why I'm making that statement. As on a daily basis, we can hear their negative verbiage and see their negative behavior playing out on center stage. They appear consumed with reckless verbiage, turning people against the government, the FBI, the Justice Department, and one another. Some appear to be suffering from perception problems and emotional instability. Their behavior seems to be shaped by their political ideology as they focus more on chasing conspiracy theories than reality, supporting lies and fighting over pointless issues. Many are fighting to protect guns, and I'm talking about assault weapons, and remove books from classrooms and libraries in an effort to hide or erase history. And reportedly, there are more guns in America than people. So there's no record, according to my knowledge, of books killing kids, but guns have killed thousands. Some politicians are irrelevant, therefore seemingly behave in ways only to get media coverage, negative or positive, versus effective leadership. And we all know that negative news sells. We're all sailing on America's political ship, and we're all responsible for its cargo. If it sinks, we all go down. Therefore, we all have a responsibility to keep the ship afloat and possibly change its course by making our votes count and our voices heard. So what does this mean? It means that we must be aware of the definition of political insanity, because if not, we the people might be main contributors to it. So what is political insanity? It is the expectation that if we keep voting for those already in office, things will be different following their re-election. But things have always remained, in my opinion, the same, or they've even gotten worse. So we need to wake up and watch how the wind is blowing. In the past, I wondered who would vote for some of these politicians that are currently on the scene. But I quickly realized that some people might not be interested in effective leadership, but rather other ingredients these individuals have in their duffel bags, such as division, dishonesty, lies, and hate. I would say to these negative politicians that division and hate will never make America great, because unity and love are our key power gates. I do not believe that the majority of Americans fit into a negative category, so hear me right. So we, the people, have the power to change the course of the political ship by declaring that enough is enough and changing our voting behavior. In theory, elected officials are supposed to represent the taxpayers and be responsive to our needs and concerns. However, if we want our voices heard and our desire to determine our own quality of life, we, the people, must make it happen. Those are my opening statements.
Thank you, Georgia Verdier, President of the local branch of the NAACP. Thanks for the opening statement, Georgia Verdier, President Verdier. And, one thing is that when it comes to one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the Einstein definition of insanity. One thing that's interesting is most people hate the Congress. You ask people what they think of the Congress, they hate it. But you ask people about their local representative, they'll say, oh yeah, she's great or he's great. And one of the reasons for that is the constituent work that a lot of local representatives are engaged with. As a congressman or a congresswoman, it's not only making laws, it's also constituent service. That's a big part of the job. Time now to move on to the next opening statement. I'd like to welcome Dr. Joseph Kolasinski, Associate Professor at Elmira College and political analyst. He has been an observer of the political scene for a long time. Dr. Joseph Kolasinski, your opening statement.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for having me. And honestly, I remember when you asked me to be here and we were talking on the phone, you said, has American politics gone insane? And of course, my first thought was, well, of course it has, obviously. But I had to go back and think about the question. And, thinking back, the 1876 election actually was stolen. Andrew Jackson freely spoke about hanging his vice president. In the 1930s, we had U.S. Congress people literally mailing Nazi propaganda with taxpayer money. But I think, the standard for insanity is probably our own baseline. And I started becoming aware of politics in the 1970s, which was pretty civil, right? I mean, Ray LaHood talked about being in Congress, and he said that, people went there to get things done. And the way to get things done was the art of compromise. It is so different now. It is venal. There are no friendships across the aisle. It's hard to see the two parties coming together on anything. And it seems like all of those things that happened, that I referenced are happening all at once. There's kill Mike Pence. These are false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. There's actual insurrectionists. But I think a piece of this is you have to think a thing that happened right after Trump was elected president is I started seeing people on social media talking about how, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Because, of course, republics are run by a smaller percentage of the country. But, this is nonsense. And elections really at this point, and this is a symptom of it, have become a game about who's going to win and not about trying to figure out what the American people want. And I think that is a sort of malignancy that is driving a lot of what we're seeing today. And And so, what we have here, this conversation, it sounds like a diagnosis. I'd really like to move on to talking about the treatment.
Well, Joseph, I look forward to that discussion as we move on this evening. Remember years ago, I read a book by a political scientist. His name was James Q. Wilson. And one of the points he made was the major aim of any politician is to win. That's it. And once a politician wins, the next major aim of a politician is to get reelected. It seems that we had that approach in steroids, on steroids at this point, in terms of people winning at all costs, lying, cheating, all kinds of things, making things up. So, American politics, maybe it's berserk. American politics has gone berserk, my friends, perhaps. Tom Santulli is a great mind, the former Chemung County executive, for years, TV analyst and commentator on WETM television. Tom Santulli, very smart when it comes to government and local government. I consider him sort of a local Eric Severide, to bring in someone from the past who did commentary and analysis at the national level. Tom Santulli, I hope comparing you to Eric Severide is okay. Tom, your opening statement.
It works for me, Steve. A lot has been said, and it's really quite sad when you look and see how this democracy was formed, and what a government that we created. It was the envy of the world. It really was. The fact that I say this every time we get together, that we can sit here tonight and talk about these things. So if we were in China or Russia, they probably would drag us out of our chairs right now and throw us in a cell for even expressing our opinion. And when I look at where we were years ago, because it was said earlier, there's always been fighting among politicians. I mean, that started since day one. But that people would fight over issues. But in the end, no matter which way it came out, people usually still got together and treated people with respect. And I think that's the word that has been lost in politics for years. No one has any respect for anyone. They say anything that's on their mind. They don't care how rotten it is or how mean it is. They just say it. The public, I think, has been turned off for years. As we know, most voters are no longer Republicans. They're not Democrats. The majority of voters are now blanks, which is a big sign that they're happy with what we're doing. The other problem is, and I felt this way all the years that I was in office, and I was in for a long time, there's a lot of nuts. There just are. You can sugarcoat it any way you want it, but there are a lot of nuts in politics. And they have a lot of power. When you think about it, to become a politician, to take an important office, whether it's the local level or at a federal level, there's not much for qualifications. It's age. You run for office, and if you win, you get a lot of power, even if you don't know a lot, or if you're not a person that's socially sound. So what we've watched, I think, is a great decline. I think it got worse under Trump, and I'll say that as a Republican. I think even though there was a lot of hatred out there, I think a lot of that 24-hour spin and not showing respect for other people, I think it's turned a lot of people off. A lot of people don't vote. We're one of the worst voting countries. Think about this, a democracy. We're one of the worst voting countries in the world, where people just don't vote. And I think that's part of the crisis. And I'm not sure what, presidents love to say this, every one of them. And Biden said it not just too long ago. The best days are ahead of us. I'm 74 years old now. I'm not so sure that that's correct. I think our best days may be behind us. I'm not sure if we can put this back together. Money, and it was said earlier, money drives everything. And the only God that there is in politics is the God of winning. politicians, in my estimation, at this point in time, the only time that they really care about their constituents is that 6 months prior to the election, especially at the state and federal level. Otherwise, you don't hear much from anybody. I mean, the one thing about local politics that I loved is, when you went to Wegmans, people pulled you over. If you went to the mall, people pulled you over. People stopped me on the street and they got in your face. When you're at the national and state level, you can kind of play it pretty low and you don't get a lot of contact with people. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And quite frankly, this country is starving for some new leadership of people that really care about America.
Tom Santulli, thank you for your opening statement. One thing that's going on, I think, too, is there's a lot of the cockamammies, a lot of nuts, a lot of verbal bomb tossers out there, and they sit in their kitchen with a computer and say all kinds of things about people, and with no responsibility. They just toss bombs. They're the cockamammies. And, I think if you're in the media or you're a public figure at all, they're out there. The cockamammies are out there. And it's really, it's kind of sad. But everybody now is an expert who has a computer, for better or for worse. And so politics has gone downhill. And we have what de Tocqueville once said, the tyranny of the majority, barbarians and fools that can say anything they want, when they want, with no responsibility. And I say that knowing that some of those barbarians and fools are watching me right now. And one of the things they do is they toss bombs, the cockamammies, and they oftentimes don't think. It's the kind of thing where they attack people personally, but really don't give any reason. And that is happening more and more in American politics. More and more politicians are acting like cockamammies, bomb tossers, and so on. So everything seems to have gone downhill in the United States in terms of the public discourse. Now, what I'm saying, one might, I think, fairly say, well, this is an exaggeration. You're exaggerating too much. And the answer to that is, yeah, but there's a lot of truth to the exaggeration, believe me. Next up, in terms of his opening statement, is the Reverend Nathaniel Wright. He's the pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Ithaca and former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. Reverend Wright, your opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, as always, for the invitation. And I certainly do agree with a lot of what has been said. I think Georgia's point that it may not be insanity as much as it is chaotic. And the chaos of it all makes it difficult for those who are not engaged in politics, for the non-politicians, to really get a handle on what's going on, right? So with the media cycle and everything, it is important then to just present political theater as opposed to activity. So I just say whatever I need to say so that I can stay on the news, so I can get trending on social media sites, and I can keep myself popular for, as Deborah Lynch mentioned, so that I can raise more money, right? And so that the cycle can continue. So in politics, we're no longer solution oriented. We are just there to stake our claim to our particular point of view, and it doesn't matter if anything ever gets solved, right? It doesn't matter if anything gets better. It doesn't matter if we make changes or adjustments to healthcare. It doesn't matter if we deal with anything with Social Security. It doesn't matter if we do anything with the environment, as long as we continue to keep the political machine going, which means that people end up losing faith in institutions. And as that faith in institutions continues to dwindle, then as a politician, I can stake my claim to talking about in disparaging ways the very institutions that I'm trying to be a part of, right? It is, down with Congress as I run for Congress, right? It is government is terrible as I want to figure out how to become a part of it, not to fix anything, not even to make it smaller, not even a matter of efficiency, but just to gum up the works. And so as trust in institutions continues to be lower, I think a lot of what we see, I do think that more often than not, I don't think that politicians have the type of relationships that they used to have. But unfortunately, I do think that many of them are friends across the aisle, which means that what we are seeing is simply political theater, right? That because we're not actually getting anything done. And so it is whatever I need to say on camera, whatever I need to say in media, whatever I need to say to whatever news outlet, and then behind closed doors, we can hang out and we can have a good time. And so the loser in all of it ends up being the American people.
Thank you, Reverend Wright, for the opening statement. I agree. What we end up with is political paralysis in America. I want to turn now to Jeff Murray. Jeff is a veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network, has a background also in broadcasting and radio. He's been on the beat in the Twin Tiers for decades. I call him the dean of journalism in the Twin Tiers. Jeff Murray, you've been listening to all this from your perspective as a journalist. What say you?
Now, Dr. Coleman, I have, like you said, I have been listening, and I've heard a lot of very valid points made. As a journalist, I can tell you that the landscape is a lot different now than it was when I started 43 years ago. I think a lot of it is a perception issue. Back when I started, you had 3 major national news networks. You had a couple of major national news magazines and influential newspapers. You had local TV, radio, newspaper, and that's where you got your news. I think the politics has kind of mirrored what's been going on in society in general over the last several decades. And I think what we're seeing is more of a voyeuristic society. These days you've got, in addition to the news networks, you've got all kinds of cable news networks and their 24-hour news cycle. You've got the internet, and you've got all kinds of websites, some that provide straight news, some that are lean conservative or lean liberal. You've got bloggers out there. You've got these days just about everybody has a cell phone, and so you can see things unfolding in real time that you couldn't even dream of that sort of thing 40, 50 years ago. And as a result, a lot of political deal making and discussions and arguments that used to take place behind closed doors are now happening right out in the open where everybody can see them. And I think to some extent there has always been a fair amount of acrimony in politics. Maybe you didn't see it as much in the old days, because, like I said, people, they might. I have read stories back in the early days of the country where the fights would break out in legislative chambers, and so there's always been a certain level of insanity. But these days, anything like that happens. You've got C-SPAN, you've got all the other outlets where everything that happens is right there for everybody to see. So it just seems a lot more real. Maybe things are a little more insane, but I think a lot of that is a perception. It seems more insane because we're seeing all of it in real time, and we didn't see that 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I think you're making some really great points, and want to go on with some discussion, but before that I want to mention the next Pundit night will be Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. So again, July 20th, a Thursday night from 7 to 9 will be the next Pundit night exclusively on mytwintiers.com. I appreciate mytwintiers.com and Nexstar Broadcasting and WETM for airing these Dr. Coleman political pundit nights, Coleman and Company political pundit nights. I think there's nothing like it, and it's a great cybercast opportunity to have these forums. Now, somebody at this point might say, any other events besides the July 20th political pundit night? And the answer is yes. May 13th is something I think that's big. Something big that's going to happen on May the 13th. There's going to be a Twin Tiers Unity in the Community rally at Centerway Square in Corning. You know, this is a rally to celebrate what we have in common rather than what separates us. And it's going to be great to have that in Centerway Square in Corning. Let's celebrate our unity, the power of unity that we have. I'm co-sponsoring this event with the Elmira Corning branch of the NAACP, talking about events in the NAACP. Georgia Verdier, I understand you're working on something. Could you fill us in?
We're going to have a membership luncheon at the Clarion Inn in Elmira on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 12 o'clock. And we'd love to have all of you show up and join us. We'll just be thanking our members and asking others to join us and just have a celebration of membership. So have a dynamic speaker there coming in. And it's going to be a short program. We won't keep you all day, but we'd love to have you join us.
Okay, that would be that'd be terrific. And we were talking the other day, Georgia, and you mentioned something in the community called the Block, and helping people. What's that about, the Block?
Okay, that is many people in Elmira are probably familiar with His Haven. With Julia was the CEO there, and they are opening up a unit for the homeless. It's called the Block, and the homeless will be able to go in there and get a shower, get a haircut, and just get cleaned up. And the community will be helping to supply that unit. They're asking for towels and linens and lotions and things of that nature. And so we are putting the word out everywhere we have a Zoom to let people know that I think it's an ideal thing for the homeless, because that's a problem for me in terms of veterans being homeless. That should never happen. So they are doing something about it, and the NAACP will donate the barber's chair so they can go there and get a haircut and get cleaned up. And then they're coordinating it with the local laundry so they can wash clothes, a couple of times a week. So it sounds like a wonderful idea, and it's in Elmira, and it's called His Haven.
Okay, thanks, Georgia. The executive producer of the Dr. Coleman and Company Political Pundit Nights is Dennis Sweeney, a veteran of broadcasting and journalism in the Twin Tiers. The WETM executive co-producers, David Sorensen, who does a great job, and Lisa Sturdivant. And again, welcome to the 31st Political Pundit Night, cybercasting with something to say. Okay, we've had all kinds of ideas, all kinds of viewpoints articulated so far. Let's start talking about what people have been saying and what you think. Dr. Dozier, what say you, Dr. Richard Dozier?
Yeah, reflecting back on what Steve Sprague said, he said it's not mental illness. But I think, I see racism, white supremacy as mental illness. For you to be coming down on somebody based on the color of their skin or denying them because of that, or because you feel greater than them, to me, that is a mental illness. And when we look at pathological liars, like George Santos, a pathological liar, but yet when we have McCarthy, who is standing behind him and saying, well, I'm not going to do anything, Kevin McCarthy, I think this is a problem that we have in our Congress. I think it is being insane to support an individual like that. And even those who are voting for them, to me, those who are voting for Kevin McCarthy back in office, when they're just going for these power grabs, as it was said before, power, it's not thinking about the people, but it's about their power. And that's a sickness. It's a sickness. When we look at a man who's, going for Speaker of the House 15 times denied, I think I would have given up maybe after the 10th time. Something is wrong with him mentally. in terms of wanting to grab that power. And realistically, he's really sold himself out to all these different factions. And so I do, I understand when we talk about mental illness as a medical term, but I do believe that you have to have some type of mental illness to in order to grab for this power, not caring about who you hurt or what you do, and not living up to the standards that the people have set. Well, and maybe there are no more standards.
Mhm. Congressman George Santos, Mitt Romney at one point maybe summed it up. He said that George Santos, the Long Island congressman, was a sick puppy. I'm not sure if George Santos has much support. I think he's a cartoon character, and people pity him or feel sorry for him or whatever. At this point, Deborah Lynch, want to jump in?
Sorry, I had to unmute. It's funny because I think back to during 2016, and I was watching, the debates on both sides of the aisle. But I remember watching with my mom back then, the Republican debates. We watched them all. And I know you all remember it if you watched. I'd never seen in exchanges like that on stage between candidates, literally calling each other names. And so, and now I'm not saying the Democrats are better. I think it's just, I didn't see that as much between Hillary and Bernie. You saw different exchanges, but not name calling. I don't know at what point we have to engage people at a level where you have to rise, you have to be a different level or a different caliber of person. I can guarantee you any of the elected officials on this call right now would never engage in activity like that. It just wouldn't happen. So to change that, I don't know if they get sound bites or they get Twitter blasts out of it, or their TikTok goes viral because of it. They're looking at it like any press is good press because it's getting my name out there and it's getting me donations from fringe people. So I don't know how to fix that. And then if you go back to the campaign finance problems, you literally have candidates that shouldn't be representing us. They just shouldn't be. They're not qualified. But because of the influx of the way people get their news today, my mother used to be so frustrated. I'd come home and she'd say, oh, we got to watch the news. And I'd say, well, here's what they're going to tell you. And because I already knew it based on social media and what was happening through the day. And she gets so frustrated because she didn't have this. And so it's also generational. She didn't have the ability and didn't want to do this. She didn't want to be on her phone. And then by the time the news rolled around, it was old news. But that's what she got her news from. She got it from a piece of paper that was delivered to the front porch and watching the news on TV. So, that's a hard thing to hold on to too. But people that are 40 and under, most of them are registering blanks because they're sick and tired of the two parties not solving problems.
I wanted to mention, Deborah Lynch, your mom, your late mom, Ruth Young, was an activist in this community for many, many, many years. And I just want to mention that just in case someone may not know, your mom and all the great work she did in the community. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, I've been listening to all of this. You've been listening to all of it. Professor Kolosinski, politically, is America going to hell in a handbasket? Professor.
Well, I don't know how quickly handbaskets go, but actually, one of the things I was thinking of, particularly listening to Deborah earlier about Citizens United and thinking about some other stuff, is that this has been a long process, right? And there's an erosion of fairness, there's an erosion of truth that probably first thing I can think of is the Reagan administration getting rid of the fairness in broadcasting doctrine, where they had to air both sides, right? But then, you know, worst thing happened, like when Newt Gingrich was speaker. One of the things he did is he got rid of, I think it was called the Office of Technology Assessment, I think, which would you know, analyze things in a bipartisan way and come up with you know, numbers that everybody could agree on that they could work forward from. And he got rid of that, I think, largely because one side of the aisle didn't like the facts, and so they diminished them. And this is just, you know, this has just been growing to the point where you know, we're getting just, you know, blatant untruths. Well, particularly, it seems most particularly from the former president, but it's been a long process, and I not sure off the top of my head how we turn that back.
Thanks, Professor. By the way, if you hear someone speaking or addressing a point, feel free to jump in, okay, and share your viewpoint. Rodney Strange, you've been active for years in county government. At one point, you were on the Elmira School Board, very well known and visible in the community. I'm getting the impression that the political chaos nationally sometimes filters down to perhaps Chemung County, where it's the executive Chris Moss versus the county legislature and fighting and so forth. Is that a problem, or is that just something that I seem to be weaving out of thin air?
Well, I mean, obviously the last 4 years brought us into some new ground that we didn't have before. We actually overrode some vetoes of the county executive. I don't know if we ever did that with Tom Santulli. I don't think we did when I was on the county legislature with Tom for the first 8 years. You know, and he's vetoed some of the budgets and things like that. And we've had a lot of lawsuits. We've learned a lot about the county charter. I think if I had to hear the word county charter one more time during the last 4 years, I was going to scream. But everybody knows on the legislature what the county charter is. You know, I think sometimes, you know, it's a good thing to have some discourse, because then, you know, a lot of things come out in the discussion. So I think things are going better now. We have a new county chair of our legislature. We seem to be working together better. Hopefully things will continue to go that way. Things are looking up. You know, it was a contentious 4 years, but I think both sides have some blame to go around there. But certainly politics has changed on the local level as it has in the national level. And I just want to get back to the George Santos issue. I don't know how that guy ran for Congress 2 election cycles, lied about every single thing on his resume, and was not caught. No one picked up on anything. I mean, he literally lied about everything, and no one found this out. I mean, now it's like, you know, from after he got elected until about a month ago, every day there was something new coming out that he lied about. I mean, where was anybody looking at his background? I mean, he literally made up his entire life and nobody caught it. I mean, and then these weren't just little white lies. I mean, these were major discrepancies in his life. And
actually, excuse me, but actually it was brought out, but the press refused to carry the stories. And that's really what happened.
It seems so bizarre to me so much. I mean, if it was a little bit, I understand. Maybe the press would ignore it. But wow, I just don't know how somebody can run for Congress like that on a national level and nobody find out about it.
Can I weigh in, Dr. Coleman, on something that Reverend Wright said? He talked about political theater. And Deborah Lynch said, unqualified people. So we have a political theater with unqualified cast. So you get what we got. You get the liars, you get the cheaters, you get the deniers, because they are getting away with it. If the people who I would think would be good, respectable people would call them on the carpet and say, no more of this, we won't tolerate this, I think some of it would go away, but there's that rationalization going on. They try to rationalize the behavior and make bad behavior look good. We have to stop that nonsense, because if we start dealing with the people, if they deal with us publicly, we join Q public. If we're doing some of these things, they lock us up, put us away, put us in the psych center or wherever we need to be. But on that level, they keep playing the role. And so until we get strong enough to have elected officials who will get off stage and stop playing roles and do their jobs and take a stand for what right and wrong, we will have all of this crazy behavior going on.
I'd like to jump in a minute, Steve. I think part of the problem, or maybe the problem, is that the quality of the candidates we've been talking about, virtually every job in the private sector, whether you're talking about a town justice or president of the United States, equivalent jobs pay far more in the private sector than we pay in the public sector. So people who are qualified are not necessarily willing to sacrifice their income and their family support to go ahead and be abused in public. We are all, as the Bible says, have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so all of us have something in our past that we don't want to be made public. But if you run for public office, that nowadays they will dig and they will find it and they will do their best to humiliate you. And not only that, but you're going to become targeted by people who are absolutely insane. We've had so many assassination attempts of congresspersons, and even federal judges have been threatened and trying to kidnap a governor of Michigan. We have placed people who may be good qualified people who want to run. There isn't sufficient security for them. There isn't sufficient financial remuneration, so it's not a sacrifice. I'm not saying that you should make a lot of money and walk away a millionaire, but you shouldn't have to sacrifice your family's livelihood to do the right thing and run for public office. So if we want more qualified people, we have to pay better, we have to provide better security, and we have to do something about general acceptance of the fact that people are human.
I'd like to make
respond. Yep. Please, Deborah Lynch.
just real quick on that. I agree with everything that Susan just said. The only part I struggle with is the average net worth of a congressperson in this country right now is way more than they get paid. So something's going on also to make them want to get that role, to get the backroom deals they obviously are getting, which is another big problem in our political field.
Mhm.
So they run for power and they run for money. Trust me.
Deborah Lynch, what about the viewpoint that human nature is flawed? A lot of people are corrupt, they're scoundrels, and that's a major reason why the founding fathers, the three branches of government, the branches and the scoundrels could check and balance each other. Isn't that what we have right now, a government of scoundrels? And hasn't that always been the case? And isn't that why the founding fathers designed American government, the American political system as they did?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea behind our political system was, as what you just said, checks and balances. Some of the best conversations I had when I was running for ledge in the county was on doorsteps of Trump supporters. You know, there'd be a Trump flag hanging out and I knocked on their door because, I wanted to talk to these people. And the reason they really gravitated towards him was because he spoke his mind. Now, sometimes that's good, that's bad, but they liked it because he flew in the face of what they perceive is hurting them. They're being taxed beyond, we fled England because we didn't want to be taxed like we're being taxed right now. I mean, most of us are paying between 30 and 40% of our income in taxes. And then if you throw in other taxes and enumerations that we pay, people are sick of it. They want these people that we elect to represent them, not the elite. And that's not at all what's happened.
Mhm.
So